to that, I'll segue to Vernay's Q&A with our partner. You'll recall our partner is the amazing Diane Russo, archivist for the Riverside Church. Diane, we are so pleased that you have embraced us as well as the archives of Riverside Church with such gusto, such passion. And you've been doing you've been such a wonderful guide to us. So Vernay, you're on for your Q&A with our archivist, Diane.
Thank you, Lavon. I am so pleased to conduct an interview with Diane Russo of the Riverside Archives. You know that archives are all about remembering. It's memoir. The subject of this series is writing memoir and justice. And this is a reason we have the archivists as our partners in this, because in fact, the archives are Riverside's memoir. So with that, Diane, I wanted to start out by just telling us about yourself. How did you become an archivist, and how did you get to Riverside?
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It's great to be here. I think I could start by saying that when I was in college, I studied history and art history. And I was really just looking for a relevant internship to get experience in those fields. And I ended up interning with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection Archives. And that actually turned into a 2-year job while I was in college. And it was that job that really sparked my interest in becoming an archivist, because I really enjoyed working with the primary sources of history and memory. I wanted to continue to make these important collections accessible to anyone who wanted to see them. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way until I got that internship. And during that time, I noticed that archival and art collections have the power to create connections. They can invoke intellectual, emotional, and even physical responses in those who interact with them. They engage the senses, they tell stories. They're tangible resources by which history is discovered and interpreted. You know, they do so much. Archival materials unlock memory. They foster dialogue, critical thinking, reflection. And as we saw last week, I was really pleasantly surprised, they foster creativity. And most importantly, I think that collections can bridge the past to the present. They help us to understand the challenges of the past and those we face in the present. And I think that they really can help illuminate the path for the future. And so with all of that in mind, in my experience, I went on to graduate school to acquire the appropriate master's degrees, all the while working in various archives, museums, and historic houses ever since that first internship. And again, the power of collections I've seen throughout all of these experiences. And I became the director of the archives at Riverside simply when I saw the position open up. Basically, I'd been the archivist and the senior collections manager at Girl Scouts of the USA for 6 years at that point. And I decided it was time to move on to another opportunity. So I saw the posting for my position. And I was really drawn to Riverside's mission and programming, particularly around social justice, and as well as its rich history, the architecture, the art. There was so much variety in Riverside that I was really intrigued. So that's why I applied and I got the job.
Great, we're glad you did. So where in Riverside, physically or digitally, or we're trying to figure out where is the Riverside Archive?
Yeah, so the Riverside Archives has a few designated collection storage spaces where many, but importantly, not all of the materials are located, and I'll get to that in a bit. But the designated spaces include a number of rooms in the back of 9T, so that's the 9th floor of the tower. There's that lovely room that is used for a lot of events and dinners and things like that behind that area. is a large storage space, and we have some rooms back there. And then there's one large room on the 10th floor in the tower. And most recently, we actually had another storage space that was in the first balcony of the nave, if you can believe it. But we've since moved the materials out of there because the environmental conditions were really bad for preservation. But that was a space we had. And then other than these main areas, physically, the collections are actually all over the building. So just to name a few, the paintings that are in Gethsemane Chapel and Assembly Hall are part of the archives, as are the Tiffany clocks that are in 9T, those big grandfather clocks. We have a Madonna and Child sculpture in the Garth outside. And then, we have numerous framed photographs and original artwork that decorates staff offices and meeting spaces throughout the whole building. So our archival collections are kind of everywhere, which makes it really exciting, but also a little bit difficult to keep track of everything. But such as Riverside, we want people to enjoy a lot of our collections. And so that's one way we do that. And in terms of a digital space, we have what we call a digital archive, which is a public-facing website that's similar to a library catalog or a museum database. So imagine that you go to your local library and you go to their catalog to find the books you need, or you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website and you see their online collections. That is sort of what we have. It's kind of a hybrid of those two. And it's something that I've actually been working on for the past 3 years. We built our system with the software developers to be fully customized to Riverside's collection. And it will finally be launching this fall. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, it's not yet released to the public, but it will be very soon. So.
Oh, good. So you've told us something to expect for the future.
Yes.
What about the beginnings of the archive? When was there an official start, or people just started collecting things, and how has it changed since that beginning?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that the Riverside Archives was developed in the late 80s and early 90s by volunteers, primarily a congregant named Victor Jordan. He was part of the Maranatha group as well, so he's very active in parish groups. To my knowledge, he was not a professional archivist. He was a volunteer, somebody very interested in saving the history, and he sort of had a team of people. I assume that the materials were held in storage areas or in people's offices before Victor Jordan got the archive together, but I can't be certain. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but I assume that's where things were. And so it seems like the archive's beginning was really a volunteer run program, which is really impressive and admirable, especially for people who didn't have archival training or who got it along the way because it was a passion of theirs. And then in the 2010s, I'm not exactly sure the year, a professional archivist was hired. Her name was Ricky Moskowitz, and she worked in the archives until 2017. And then I arrived in 2018, and I was the only staff member for 2 years until I hired our archivist, Vincent Kelly, who some of you may know, and our archives technician, Brian Engel. So we're a mighty staff of, I say 2.5 because Brian is part-time. So 2 full-time, 1 part-time person.
And how do items get in the archives? What's the process for intake?
So since we're an institutional archive, items are transferred to us from various departments and lay leadership by various methods, depending on whether they're digital or physical, but that's primarily how we get most of our collections. We have a process that we call appraising and accessioning, which entails my staff and I examining materials and determining if they should be placed in the archives. It's actually the standard that most records and most items do not make it into the archive. And if you think about it this way, since we're an institutional archive, think about the number of items that are created during the normal course of business in a nonprofit or an organization. That is a lot of material, and really a small percent of those materials actually have historical and cultural value or intrinsic value. And so as archivists, it's actually part of our training to develop the knowledge and sort of the eye for what is archival. And so that's, again, the appraising and accessioning process, and that's how we get things into the archive. We also have another way where we have donations to the archives from external folks, and we use the same procedures to determine whether we'll accept the items or not. In these cases, we also have to ask ourselves if items are relevant to Riverside because they're coming from somewhere else, and if we have the capacity and the resources to steward them. We want to make sure that we can preserve them, that we can make them accessible. And sometimes the answer to both questions, their relevancy and if we can steward them, is no. And if it's a no, we don't accept the items.
So many are rejected, it sounds like. I'm thinking especially of when Riverside gets bad press, which we have gotten from time to time. Those things don't naturally go into the archives just because they're about Riverside.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, you know, newspaper articles that try to tell what's going on with our church administration or things like that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Those I do try to keep. And it's so when it's one of the things that we, myself and my staff, really try to do is try to be as objective as we can about what we collect, and try to have a diversity of voices, even if we don't agree with what the voices are saying. So if there is bad press, for instance, or there is some sort of controversy going on, we try to collect those materials because we believe in the future that people will try to research about that and figure out what happened. And with time, they might be able to look at it in a different way. History is messy and it's not always pleasant. It's often not pleasant. And we try to collect the messy stuff as well as the good stuff. But if it's not, if it's somebody wants to give something to us that is truly not relevant to Riverside in a way that, like, we can't see a connection that makes sense, or if it belongs somewhere else, like perhaps in another archive, in another museum, then we'll reject it. An example would be a woman recently passed. She was an artist and she had a collection of 50 plus paintings, and her estate was trying to find a home for them, and they were religious works of art, so they considered Riverside, and we did the accessioning and the appraising process, and we decided that even though they were religious, the primary reason that we couldn't accept them is because they didn't have a direct connection to Riverside, and we could not preserve and handle 50 plus paintings with the resources that we have right now. So that's an example of one that kind of hit both reasons why it was rejected.
Who uses the archives, and what kind of inquiries do they make? I'm thinking of, we're sitting right next to several universities, seminaries. Who uses them, and what inquiries do they make?
Everyone. Everyone. So I like to say that our constituency, our audience, is Riverside staff, lay leaders, the congregation. So those are internal folks, but also the congregation, the general public, students, academics, professors, other organizations. The media comes to us a lot. You name it. We've had every type of person in different positions ask for help or for requests, and what they ask for really varies. The inquiries vary, so it could be something what we call a reference question, which is people asking for historical information. It could be requests for digital photographs or images or audio. And it could be requests to search the physical materials themselves for their own research projects. So topics that are commonly asked for would be our WRVR collection, which was our Riverside radio. We recently digitized that for a grant, so people know about it, folks want to access it. That's a big one. MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. is a huge topic. Harry Emerson Fosdick, he was our first senior minister. Genealogical information like marriages and baptisms, and especially our justice initiatives and programs. Like our sanctuary movement recently has had a lot of people interested. And then our architecture and our art. Those are kind of the big ones that lots of people ask for.
Sure. And lastly, what impact do you think the archive has had on the church's functioning or its reputation?
Yeah, I like to think that the archives has made Riverside's institutional history more available to those who need it and have made life easier for staff and lay leaders. So accessing information is often key to running a large organization like Riverside. And so we try to make that process of accessing information as seamlessly as possible. And then in terms of the church's reputation, I think that the archives shows the world that Riverside cares about its history and its stories. The archive serves as the institutional memory of the church, and keeping that memory alive is integral to our mission and to our everyday functioning. And it's important for us to keep the memory alive so that when we move forward, we do so in an effective and positive way. Especially in matters of justice. We try very hard to continue on with our legacy of social justice. And so, yeah, I think, as you've mentioned before, the Riverside Archives is the memoir of Riverside. And if we don't look back to our history, we can't really know how far we've come and how further we have to go in many ways. And so, that's what I think the archives does at Riverside, and I hope will continue to do.